Some people spend a lifetime believing that power changes the world, but every once in a while, the smallest act of kindness changes the heart of the person who holds all the power. On a cold Thursday evening, with a light rain painting silver reflections across the cracked pavement outside a neighborhood grocery store in Chicago, 28-year-old Olivia Carter stood behind register number 3, rubbing her tired hands together before greeting the next customer with the same warm smile she had offered hundreds of times that day. She had already worked nearly 11 hours. Her feet ached inside inexpensive shoes, and her refrigerator at home held little more than milk, eggs, and a half loaf of bread, yet she still managed to look every customer in the eye as though they mattered. Most people hurried through the checkout lanes without noticing her, treating her like another piece of store equipment that scanned barcodes and wished them a pleasant evening. But Olivia had learned years ago that dignity could survive even where comfort could not. As the clock crept toward closing time, the automatic doors slid open one more time, and an older man wearing a faded gray jacket stepped quietly inside. His clothes were clean but worn, his shoulders carried an invisible weight, and his face revealed nothing except exhaustion. He filled a small shopping basket with bread, canned soup, oatmeal, fresh fruit, and a gallon of milk, never reaching for anything unnecessary. When he finally placed the groceries on Olivia's conveyor belt, she noticed how carefully he arranged every item, as though each dollar mattered. The scanner beeped steadily until the register displayed the final total. The man reached into his pocket and counted a handful of bills before searching again for loose change that never appeared. His fingers paused. His expression remained calm, but disappointment settled quietly across his face. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I'll have to put some things back." Behind him, several impatient customers sighed loudly. One glanced at a watch. Another muttered that people should know what they could afford before getting in line. The man nodded politely and reached for the loaf of bread first, preparing to give it up. Olivia looked at the groceries for only a second before opening her own wallet beneath the counter. She pulled out the cash she had planned to use for gasoline the next morning and gently placed it beside the register. "It's okay," she said with a gentle smile. "Please take everything. Everyone deserves to eat dinner." The customers fell strangely quiet. The man slowly lifted his eyes to meet hers, studying her face as though trying to understand something he had forgotten long ago. "You don't even know me," he replied. Olivia simply shrugged. "I don't have to." The receipt printed with its familiar mechanical hum. She packed every grocery bag carefully, placing the bread on top so it would not be crushed. The stranger accepted the bags with both hands and thanked her in a voice almost too quiet to hear before disappearing into the rainy night. Olivia believed she had just helped another struggling man through one difficult evening. She never imagined that the quiet stranger walking into the darkness was Adrian Moretti, the most feared mafia boss in the city, a man whose name powerful businessmen whispered only behind closed doors. And that one small act of compassion had just changed the course of two completely different lives. Olivia Carter reached her apartment just after 10:30 that night, climbing 3 narrow flights of stairs with the same quiet determination that carried her through every difficult day. The building was old, the hallway lights flickered whenever the elevator started somewhere below, and the radiator inside her small apartment made more noise than heat, but it was home. She placed her name tag on the kitchen table, removed her shoes, and carefully counted the cash left in her wallet. After paying for the stranger's groceries, she had barely enough to fill her car with gas before her morning shift. She looked at the folded receipt for a moment and smiled anyway. It had been a long time since she believed that generosity always came back to the person who gave it, yet she had never stopped believing that someone facing a difficult day deserved a little hope. That belief had not appeared by accident. Years earlier, when Olivia was only 15, her mother had lost her battle with cancer after months of exhausting hospital visits. During those difficult months, complete strangers had quietly left grocery bags on their front porch, paid utility bills without leaving their names, and reminded a frightened teenage girl that kindness could exist even when life seemed unfair. Nobody had asked for recognition. Nobody expected repayment. Those silent acts became the foundation of the woman Olivia would eventually become. Every Friday morning, before reporting to work, she stopped by her grandmother Evelyn Carter's apartment with fresh fruit, medication, and coffee. Evelyn often laughed that Olivia worried too much, But she always noticed how her granddaughter skipped buying new clothes, postponed replacing her aging sedan, and worked extra shifts so someone else would never have to feel abandoned. At the grocery store, Olivia had quietly earned a reputation that few customers ever noticed. Whenever a child dropped candy because parents could not afford both treats and essentials, she somehow found a store coupon. When an elderly veteran struggled to carry heavy bags, she walked outside and loaded every grocery into the trunk before returning to her register. If someone came up a few dollars short, Olivia never embarrassed them. She simply covered the difference whenever she could, pretending the register had applied another discount. Her manager occasionally reminded her not to spend so much of her own paycheck helping customers, but Olivia always answered with the same gentle smile. Some people need groceries more than I need another coffee. Meanwhile, somewhere across the city, the man she had helped placed the bags carefully on a polished kitchen island inside an estate that seemed to belong to another world entirely. The expensive marble floors reflected soft lights from towering windows, yet the house felt strangely empty. Adrian Moretti slowly unpacked every item Olivia had paid for, stopping when he reached the loaf of bread she had carefully placed on top so it would not be crushed. His eyes lingered on the receipt still, folded inside one of the bags. For years he had watched people become nervous, overly respectful, or openly fearful whenever they sensed wealth or influence. But the young cashier had seen none of those things. She had seen only a tired man who needed dinner. Adrian sat quietly, replaying every word she had spoken. The amount she spent would have meant nothing to him, yet he understood it had probably cost her something important. For the first time in many years, a simple act of compassion weighed more heavily on his mind than any business meeting, any expensive possession, or any display of power. Before the night was over, he quietly instructed one trusted assistant to find out everything about Olivia Carter, not because she owed him anything, but because he could not remember the last time someone had treated him like an ordinary human being instead of the powerful name everyone else feared. The following afternoon arrived with bright autumn sunlight spilling through the grocery store windows, making the polished floor shine while customers hurried through their ordinary routines without realizing that someone extraordinary was quietly watching them. Adrian Moretti entered wearing the same faded gray jacket, the same simple jeans, and the same calm expression. Nothing about his appearance suggested influence or wealth. To every shopper around him, he looked like another hard-working man stopping by after a long day. Olivia recognized him immediately and welcomed him with the same sincere smile she offered everyone else. There was no surprise, no expectation, and certainly no hint that she hoped he would somehow repay her generosity. "Good afternoon," she said warmly. "Did everything work out last night?" Adrian paused for a brief moment before answering. It had been years since anyone had asked him such a simple question with genuine concern. "Yes," he replied quietly. "It did. Thank you." Olivia nodded as she continued scanning groceries for another customer before returning her attention to him. This time his basket contained only coffee, fresh apples, eggs, and oatmeal. She noticed that he chose practical items again, and she wondered if life had been difficult for him for longer than just one evening. As she packed his groceries, she placed the eggs carefully beside the bread to keep them safe during the walk home. It was such a small gesture that most people would never have noticed, yet Adrian noticed every detail. Across the store, a young mother struggled to calm her little boy after he accidentally dropped a box of cereal, spilling colorful pieces across the aisle. Before any employee could respond, Olivia politely asked a coworker to watch her register for a minute. She hurried over with a broom, knelt beside the embarrassed child, and smiled. "Accidents happen," she said gently. "We can clean this up together." Within moments, the little boy was smiling again. His mother thanked Olivia repeatedly, but Olivia simply wished them a wonderful day and returned to her register as though nothing unusual had happened. Adrian observed the entire moment in silence. It was becoming impossible to believe that her kindness had been reserved for him alone. She treated strangers, children, elderly customers, and overwhelmed parents with exactly the same quiet respect. Later that afternoon, an elderly man discovered he was a few dollars short when paying for his groceries. Before he could remove anything from his cart, Olivia discreetly scanned a small store coupon and quietly covered the remaining balance herself. The gentleman left believing the store had simply offered an unexpected discount. Adrian understood the truth immediately because he saw Olivia place the missing bills into the register after the customer had walked away. She never looked around to see whether anyone had noticed. She did not seek applause. She did not expect gratitude. She simply returned to greeting the next customer with another warm smile. Standing near the exit, Adrian realized that what impressed him was not one generous decision made on a rainy evening. It was the consistency of her character. Kindness was not something Olivia performed when life was convenient. It was the way she chose to live every ordinary day, even while carrying burdens of her own. As he stepped outside into the cool afternoon air, he quietly reached for his phone and called the trusted assistant who had begun gathering information. "Do not rush," Adrian said calmly. "I want the truth about her life, not rumors. Find out who Olivia Carter really is." After ending the call, he looked back through the glass doors and saw Olivia laughing softly with an elderly customer who reminded her of her grandmother. For reasons he could not fully explain, the walls he had built around his heart over many years no longer felt quite as permanent. 3 days passed before the first report reached Adrian Moretti's desk, yet instead of opening it immediately, he set the envelope aside and stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. From there, the city looked peaceful, its streets filled with people chasing ordinary lives, completely unaware that one of the most influential men among them had become distracted by the kindness of a grocery store cashier. He had spent years studying people, learning that loyalty could be purchased, respect could be demanded, and fear could silence almost anyone. Genuine compassion, however, refused to follow those rules. When he finally opened the report, every page confirmed what he had quietly begun to suspect. Olivia Carter had no hidden agenda, no wealthy relatives, no secret ambitions waiting to be uncovered. She lived in a modest apartment, worked extra shifts whenever another employee needed time off, visited her grandmother every Friday morning without fail, and donated small amounts of food to a neighborhood pantry whenever she could afford it. The investigator had even noted that several coworkers described her as the person who stayed after closing to help clean when someone else was having a difficult day. Adrian read every sentence twice, not because the information was complicated, but because it felt unfamiliar. He had become accustomed to reading reports filled with numbers, negotiations, and strategies. This was the first document in years that measured a person's value through quiet moments no one expected to be noticed. The following evening, Adrian returned to the grocery store once again, carrying only a small basket. Olivia greeted him with the same calm warmth she had shown during every previous visit. She did not ask personal questions. She did not mention the money she had spent. She simply asked, "How has your week been?" Adrian almost smiled. "Better than I expected," he answered honestly. As Olivia scanned his groceries, an elderly woman entered the checkout lane searching every pocket of her purse for a store loyalty card she could not find. She apologized repeatedly, worried about delaying everyone behind her. Olivia gently shook her head and said, "Please take your time. We are not in a race." The tension immediately disappeared from the woman's face. Adrian noticed something remarkable. Olivia had a way of making people feel as though they were never an inconvenience. After the customer left, the store grew quiet for a brief moment. Adrian looked at Olivia before asking a question that surprised even himself. "Why do you always help people you do not know?" Olivia paused while placing a carton of milk into the bag. Her answer came without hesitation. "Because someone I never knew once helped my family when we needed it most. They never asked for anything in return. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, I would keep that kindness moving forward instead of letting it end with me." Adrian lowered his eyes to the grocery bag resting on the counter. Those simple words carried more weight than speeches he had heard from powerful executives or community leaders. Before leaving, he thanked her once again. Olivia only smiled and wished him a peaceful evening. As Adrian walked toward the parking lot, he realized the investigator's report had missed the most important detail of all. It could describe where Olivia lived, how much she earned, and what she did every day, but it could never fully explain the quiet strength that allowed her to remain generous in a world that so often rewarded the opposite. For the first time in many years, Adrian found himself wondering whether true influence was measured by the number of people who obeyed a person, or by the number of lives that became brighter simply because one compassionate soul had crossed their path. The days that followed unfolded with an almost invisible rhythm, as though two completely different lives had begun moving toward the same destination without either person fully understanding why. Every afternoon, Adrian Moretti found another ordinary reason to visit the grocery store. Sometimes he bought only a loaf of whole wheat bread. Other times it was a bag of oranges, a carton of milk, or fresh vegetables that any neighborhood customer might choose. Each visit lasted only a few minutes, yet those brief moments gradually became the quietest part of his day. Olivia never treated him differently from anyone else. She remembered that he preferred dark roast coffee without ever mentioning it. She carefully packed fragile items on top of heavier groceries. If the line became long, she apologized to every waiting customer with equal sincerity, making each person feel seen instead of rushed. Adrian watched how naturally she carried herself, never performing kindness for attention because she believed kindness itself was enough. One rainy afternoon, he arrived just as Olivia was finishing her shift. Instead of leaving immediately, she walked toward the employee break room, picked up 2 paper grocery bags, and carried them out the back entrance. Curiosity led Adrian to remain at a respectful distance. He watched her drive only a few blocks before stopping at a modest brick apartment building where her grandmother, Evelyn Carter, lived. Olivia helped her upstairs with fresh fruit, soup, medicine, and a bouquet of inexpensive yellow flowers that somehow made the small apartment glow with warmth. Through the window, Adrian could see the 2 women laughing over steaming cups of tea as though they had all the riches they could ever need. Nobody knew he was there. Nobody was performing for an audience. It was simply another ordinary Thursday in Olivia's life. The next morning, Adrian received an updated report from his assistant. It explained that Olivia had quietly volunteered at the neighborhood food pantry twice each month whenever her schedule allowed. She never posted photographs online, never accepted awards, and had even declined an offer to be recognized during a community fundraiser because she believed attention should remain on the families receiving help instead of the volunteers. Adrian placed the report aside and closed his eyes for a long moment. Throughout his life, he had met countless people eager to appear generous whenever cameras were present. Olivia had chosen the opposite path. Her greatest acts of compassion happened where almost nobody would ever witness them. Later that evening, Adrian returned to the grocery store once again. The checkout lanes were nearly empty, and soft music drifted through the speakers as employees prepared for closing. Olivia smiled when she saw him approaching with a small basket. "Looks like you timed it perfectly," she said. "No waiting tonight." Adrian nodded before asking quietly, "Do you ever get tired of giving so much of yourself?" Olivia considered the question while placing an apple into the grocery bag. "Of course I get tired," she answered honestly. "But being tired is different from being unwilling. Someone once made my hardest days a little easier. If I can do that for someone else, then I sleep well at night." Adrian stood silently as those words settled into his heart. He had spent years believing that strength meant protecting everything he had built. Yet standing across from Olivia, he began to understand another kind of strength entirely, the quiet courage to remain generous even when life offered no guarantee that kindness would ever be returned. As he stepped back into the cool evening air, the city lights shimmered across rain-soaked streets. And for the first time in many years, Adrian found himself looking at those lights not as symbols of influence or success, but as reminders that somewhere behind every glowing window lived ordinary people whose greatest wealth could never be measured by what they owned, only by what they chose to give. Nearly 2 weeks had passed since the rainy evening that first brought their paths together, and although nothing dramatic had happened on the surface, everything beneath had begun to change. Adrian Moretti no longer visited the grocery store out of curiosity alone. Without realizing it, he had started looking forward to the few ordinary minutes he spent standing in Olivia Carter's checkout lane. They spoke only briefly each time, exchanging simple conversations about the weather, fresh produce, or how busy the store had been that day. Yet those quiet exchanges carried a sense of peace that his carefully protected world had not offered in years. One crisp Saturday afternoon, the calm routine suddenly shifted. A convoy of polished black luxury vehicles rolled slowly into the grocery store parking lot, their arrival drawing confused glances from shoppers loading groceries into their trunks. Several professionally dressed men stepped out first, scanning the area before opening the rear passenger door. Adrian emerged wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit instead of the faded jacket Olivia had always seen. The difference was impossible to ignore. Customers who recognized his face immediately lowered their voices. The store manager hurried toward the entrance with visible anxiety while employees exchanged bewildered looks from behind their registers. Olivia glanced up from scanning a customer's groceries and froze for the first time since she had met him. Her eyes moved from the elegant vehicles outside to the respectful distance maintained by every man surrounding him, and then back to the quiet customer she had believed was simply struggling through difficult times. The pieces fit together almost instantly. She remembered the calm confidence in his voice, the careful way he observed people, and the dignity he carried even when he appeared to own very little. Adrian walked toward register number 3 with the same measured pace he always had, but now the entire store watched every step. The manager nervously apologized for not recognizing him sooner and offered to close the checkout lane for privacy. Adrian thanked him politely before saying, "There is no need. I came here for the same reason I always do." The manager stepped aside without another word. Olivia stood quietly behind the register, still trying to reconcile the humble stranger she had helped with the influential man now standing before her. Adrian placed a small basket containing bread, apples, coffee, and milk onto the conveyor belt exactly as he had done every previous visit. Neither of them spoke until Olivia finished scanning the final item. She looked into his eyes and asked softly, "You knew I did not know who you were?" Adrian nodded. "Yes." She hesitated for only a moment before asking the question that had rested silently in her heart. "Why did you not tell me?" Adrian smiled gently, a genuine expression that very few people had ever seen. "Because I wanted someone to see the man before the name." The words settled over the checkout lane with unexpected stillness. Every employee nearby remained silent. Customers who had been whispering only moments earlier stopped speaking altogether. Olivia slowly handed him the receipt exactly as she always had. Her hands did not tremble, and her voice remained warm. "Then I am glad I treated you the way I would treat anyone else." Adrian accepted the grocery bag with quiet gratitude. In that moment, surrounded by expensive suits, polished vehicles, and countless curious eyes, he realized the greatest gift Olivia had ever given him was not a bag of groceries. It was a few ordinary days during which he had been allowed to exist as nothing more and nothing less than another human being. The quiet conversation at register number 3 spread through the store long after Adrian Moretti walked away. Employees whispered to one another while customers glanced through the front windows at the line of elegant black vehicles waiting outside. Olivia returned to scanning groceries as though nothing extraordinary had happened. She greeted the next customer with the same warm smile, asked whether they had found everything they needed, and carefully packed each bag with the same attention she had always given. By the end of her shift, however, the manager gently asked if she could stay for a few minutes. Sitting in the small office behind the break room, he looked at her with a mixture of amazement and concern. "Do you understand who that man is?" he asked quietly. Olivia nodded. "I do now." The manager sighed. Most people would have been terrified. Olivia thought for a moment before answering. "I was never helping a title. I was helping a person." Those simple words lingered in the room long after the conversation ended. Across the city, Adrian sat alone inside his office, the skyline glowing beyond the glass as evening settled over Chicago. The memory of Olivia's response refused to leave him. She had not apologized for treating him like an ordinary customer. She had not become intimidated after learning his identity. Most surprising of all, she had not asked for anything. No favor, no opportunity, no reward. She had simply remained herself. It was a kind of integrity that money could never purchase. The following morning, Adrian instructed his assistant to arrange a private meeting with the director of the neighborhood food pantry, where Olivia volunteered. When he arrived, he walked through rows of neatly organized shelves filled with canned goods, rice, pasta, cereal, and fresh produce donated by local businesses. Families quietly selected groceries while volunteers greeted everyone with respect instead of pity. The director spoke warmly about Olivia without realizing who Adrian truly was. "She never misses a chance to help," the woman explained. "Sometimes she finishes a full shift at the grocery store and still comes here to sort donations. If we thank her too much, she just smiles and says someone else once did the same for her." Adrian listened without interrupting. As he looked around the pantry, he noticed small details that reminded him of Olivia. Every shelf was organized with care. Every family was treated with dignity. Nobody was rushed. Nobody was embarrassed. Before leaving, Adrian quietly made arrangements for regular deliveries of fresh food to the pantry through an anonymous charitable foundation. He specifically requested that no public announcement be made and that no donor's name appear anywhere inside the building. Several days later, Olivia arrived for her volunteer shift and immediately noticed that the pantry refrigerators were completely stocked with fresh vegetables, milk, eggs, fruit, and meat, enough to serve hundreds of additional families. The director could only smile and say that an anonymous supporter had decided to help. Olivia looked around the room, watching parents choose healthy food without worrying that supplies would run out. A gentle smile crossed her face as she silently thanked the unknown donor in her heart. She had no idea that Adrian was standing across the street inside a parked car, watching through the window as she celebrated someone else's generosity instead of wondering whether she deserved any credit herself. In that quiet moment, he finally understood what true gratitude looked like. It did not seek recognition. It simply inspired another act of kindness, allowing compassion to travel from one life to another without ever asking who would receive the applause. Autumn gradually gave way to the first hints of winter, and with every passing week the quiet changes continued spreading farther than either Olivia Carter or Adrian Moretti could have imagined. The neighborhood food pantry remained fully stocked, and word quietly spread among local families that fresh groceries were now available every week instead of only once a month. Parents who had once worried about choosing between paying utility bills and buying healthy food could finally breathe a little easier. Volunteers noticed the difference immediately, but no one knew the identity of the anonymous supporter. Olivia simply smiled whenever another delivery arrived, believing that somewhere in the city another kind person had decided to continue the same chain of generosity that had once rescued her own family. One evening, shortly before the grocery store closed, Adrian entered alone once again. There were no luxury vehicles waiting outside, no assistants, and no expensive suit. He wore the familiar gray jacket that had first brought him into Olivia's checkout lane. She greeted him exactly as she always had, and for a few peaceful minutes everything felt wonderfully ordinary. As she finished placing his groceries into reusable bags, Adrian looked at her with quiet gratitude. "I have been wanting to thank you properly," he said. Olivia smiled politely. "You already have." Adrian tilted his head slightly. "I do not think I have." For the first time since they had met, Olivia realized she knew something about him that he did not realize she had discovered. She had begun noticing the new deliveries arriving at the food pantry shortly after learning his true identity. The timing had been too perfect to ignore. She looked at him with the same calm expression that had never changed. "Someone has been helping a lot of families recently," she said softly. "Whoever they are, I hope they keep going." Adrian remained silent for several seconds before a faint smile appeared. Neither of them spoke another word about it. They did not need to. Some truths became more meaningful when left unspoken. Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and carefully placed a small white envelope on the counter. "Please take this," he said. Olivia looked at it without touching it. "What is it?" "An opportunity," Adrian answered. "It can change your life." Olivia gently pushed the envelope back across the counter. "My life has already changed." Adrian seemed surprised. Without even opening it, Olivia nodded. "You chose to help people you will probably never meet. That tells me everything I hoped was true about you. If I accept something because I was kind, then kindness becomes a transaction instead of a gift." The words settled quietly between them. Adrian lowered his eyes for a moment before carefully placing the envelope back into his pocket. There was no disappointment on his face, only admiration. "Then tell me one thing I can do," he said sincerely. Olivia thought carefully before answering. "Promise me that every person who needs help will be treated with dignity first. Food matters. Shelter matters. But never let anyone feel ashamed for needing either one." Adrian nodded without hesitation. "You have my word." As he walked toward the exit, snowflakes had begun drifting gently beneath the parking lot lights, covering the sidewalks in a thin blanket of white. Olivia watched him disappear into the quiet evening, knowing she had not changed the world by paying for one stranger's groceries. She had simply reminded one powerful man that compassion carried a value greater than recognition, and from that single reminder, countless lives had already begun to grow brighter. 1 year later, the neighborhood looked almost the same, yet the lives within it had quietly changed in ways that could never be measured by buildings or streets. The grocery stores still welcomed customers every morning with the familiar sound of shopping carts rolling across polished floors and cash registers greeting another ordinary day. Olivia Carter still worked behind register number 3, wearing the same simple name tag and offering the same genuine smile to every person who stepped into her checkout lane. She had received promotions more than once, but she had chosen to remain where she believed she could make the greatest difference. Every day brought another opportunity to encourage a tired parent, reassure an elderly customer, or remind someone struggling that they still deserved kindness. Nothing about her compassion had become larger. It had simply become deeper. Across the city, the anonymous food program had expanded far beyond a single neighborhood pantry. Fresh groceries now reached community centers, senior housing facilities, and family shelters throughout Chicago. Volunteers often wondered who had made such remarkable generosity possible, but no public announcements were ever made and no names appeared on donation plaques. Adrian Moretti had honored the promise he made that snowy evening. Every project began with one simple principle that had quietly transformed his own life. Every person would be treated with dignity first. One crisp Saturday afternoon, Adrian returned to the grocery store once again, dressed in a simple jacket and carrying only a small basket filled with bread, apples, coffee, and milk. He no longer needed a disguise. He simply preferred being greeted as another customer. Olivia looked up, smiled warmly, and said, "Good afternoon. It is nice to see you again." Adrian smiled back with the quiet confidence of a man who no longer felt the need to prove who he was. "It is always good to be here," he replied. As she scanned the final item, a young father stepped into the next checkout lane holding the hand of his little daughter. The child pointed toward a box of cereal with bright colors across the front, then looked down when her father quietly explained that they would have to wait until next week. Before either of them could feel embarrassed, Olivia reached beneath the counter, scanned a store rewards coupon, and smiled. "Looks like today's promotion covered it." The father's shoulders relaxed with relief, and the little girl's eyes sparkled with excitement. Adrian watched the moment unfold exactly as he had watched so many others before it. Olivia had not changed because someone powerful had entered her life. She had remained faithful to the same values that existed long before they met. When Adrian collected his grocery bag, he paused for a brief moment before saying, "You once told me that kindness should keep moving forward instead of ending with one person." Olivia nodded gently. "I still believe that." Adrian looked around the busy store where strangers passed one another without realizing that an extraordinary story had quietly begun in this very place. "It did," he said softly, "and it still is." They exchanged one final smile before he walked toward the exit, disappearing into the afternoon sunlight among dozens of ordinary shoppers. No one applauded. No one knew how many families had found hope because of one quiet decision made on a rainy evening. Yet somewhere across the city, children sat down to healthy meals, grandparents opened full refrigerators, and struggling parents found the strength to keep going because one cashier had chosen compassion over convenience. Sometimes the greatest transformations begin with nothing more than a grocery receipt, a warm smile, and the courage to see a stranger as a fellow human being. And on that ordinary day, the city quietly remembered what true dignity looks like.